What's up, everyone? This is Josh Rubin from East West Healing. Today I want to talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But before we jump in, don't forget to like this video, show us a little support. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show us a little more support. And don't forget to ring that notification button. So every Wednesday when we put out a video, you, the person watching this, gets notified. Let's jump in. Fatty liver. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to fatty liver. And I can tell you from personal experience, because in 2013, I went through this. And a lot of doctors really don't know what to do. They don't know how to treat it. A lot of practitioners don't know what to do and don't know how to treat it. Because it's called fatty liver, a lot of people say, well, don't eat fat. Stay away from saturated fats. Stay away from PUFAs. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't play a role, but it plays a very, 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 very tiny role. On the other end of it, there's a group of people in a population that say, it's sugar, stay away from sugar, don't eat sugar, it's hyperglycemia, it's all the sugar we're taking in the processed food that's leading, to fatty liver. I'm not saying that's definitely not a piece to the puzzle, but I don't think it's a big piece of the puzzle. I mean, if you're eating a lot of that, you're missing other important foods, and that's really the indirect cause. And most research show, and according to what I went through in my experience and how I healed myself using our RTM method, non-alcoholic fatty liver is from a retinol deficiency, right? Now, the liver stores retinol. That's where a lot of it is stored. And using the full Monty Iron panel, which you can find in the description below, I haven't found one person yet that has optimal liver retinol. Why? Well, there's many reasons. I think, a lot of us aren't getting enough retinol-rich foods. We're not getting the eggs or clean dairy. It has added synthetic A and D, or it's ultra pasteurized. We're not getting clean eggs or maybe enough eggs because we're afraid of the cholesterol. A lot of people aren't eating enough fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring. We don't like fish, or we don't eat enough of it, or we're not getting a clean fish, right? Or we're not eating nature's multivitamin, which is organ meats, because we don't like them. They're gross, they're bad, whatever in between. And that's where you're going to get most of your retinol. And if you think about it, I can tell you from experience of working with people, most people eat eggs, but you can't get all your retinol from eggs. It's just not enough. Most people don't eat organ meats. Most people are adding, eating or drinking dairy that's just highly pasteurized, has added synthetic A and D, which is not retinol. And people just don't eat enough seafood. That's plain and simple. The other end of the spectrum, which we'll do a video on, we have a lot of Instagram posts on, is the excess intake of the supplement vitamin D, which research shows will deplete liver retinol, and we see it. Renal potassium, we see it on the HTMA, which you can find in the description below. So we see this all the time. This is why people have low liver retinol. Now the question is why? How does that lead to fatty liver? Well, it's Thyroid complex, but it's quite simple. We've talked about this many times. Retinol is carried to the liver via a protein, the TTR protein, with T4. It's carried, but they're both carried there for a reason. Why? So we can convert thyroid hormone, activate thyroid hormone receptors, and load stored copper that's in the liver into that protein ceruloplasmin, which is bioavailable copper. So we can activate oxygen in the cell and complex 4 in the mitochondria. We can activate those cytochrome enzymes, right, which are just loaded with copper, little copper gems in there. And we can produce energy. We can keep that cycle going. That's money in the bank. So we can produce all our antioxidants, glutathione peroxidase, superoxide dismutase, cytochrome oxidase. The list goes on, right? This is what we want to do. This helps us regulate inflammation. This helps us recycle iron, right? So we don't end up with fatty liver. Now, if we don't have enough retinol, what happens? Well, of course, we're going to be told we have a copper toxicity, which we've done a YouTube on, which really means we don't have a retinol to load copper into ceruloplasmin. So it really means we're copper deficient. Or you're told you have anemia, which I was told with a ferritin over 1,000 and hemoglobin 21 and a saturation of like 65. Not anemic. I am overloaded in iron. They're looking at this side of the seesaw, low blood, but I'm toxic in the tissues. Why? Because you can't transport iron. You can't recycle it into the blood, so it's not showing. How does retinol play a role? Well, most ferritin synthesis happens in the liver. You recycle iron in the hepatocytes. It's one of the places you recycle iron. The hepatocytes in the liver. This is really important because when you think about iron recycling, and I'm really just kind of simplifying this so it makes sense to you, it's a lot more complex, but you have copper-rich enzymes, hepastin, ferrooxidase, and ferroportin. And they're all copper dependent. Without them, they cannot do their job, right? You need copper to activate these enzymes. And, we have this recycling systems that recycles the RES, reticular endothelial system, that recycles 24 milligrams a day. So we don't need to be taking in iron. We don't need to be eating foods that are fortified with iron. We don't need to be taking iron supplements. We can get all the little we need from food so we can recycle it on the daily. But you need copper to activate these enzymes, because as iron goes in, you have to activate hepastin, right? It's almost like you pay copper to hepastin, so iron can go through that piece of the cell into the next kind of chamber. It's like going through the front door to get in the building. And that's where ferrooxidase is activated by copper. And ferrooxidase takes ferrous iron, which is dangerous ferrous iron, and kind of changes it into, let's say, ferric. We'll say changes it or converts it into ferric, less dangerous iron. And then we pay the backdoor bouncer, which is ferroportin, and that's copper dependent. So iron will pay him and then go into the blood. But if we don't have copper, we can't activate these enzymes. You can't get iron into the blood. It will build up in the hepatocytes in the liver because we don't have enough retinol. Because retinol loads copper into ceruloplasmin, which is bioavailable copper, and that's the copper that pays hepastin, pays ferrooxidase, and pays ferroportin. And the problem with this is, if you don't have ceruloplasmin to activate those enzymes, and you don't have ceruloplasmin to load ferritin into the cell, into the hepatocytes, where most of the synthesis takes place, what happens? Well, it creates inflammation. So now ferritin blows outside the cell where it shouldn't be, and it shows up in the blood where it shouldn't be. This creates tons of inflammation. You're not recycling iron. This creates even more inflammation. You're releasing, NF-kappa B, cytokines, interleukins. We have a 5-alarm, 10-alarm fire going on, 500,000 acre forest fire, and it's all happening in the liver because you don't have enough copper to recycle iron. As this happens, because of this inflammation, the liver starts producing this peptide called hepcidin. And a lot of people think it's an iron-regulating peptide, and it's not. It's the response to the inflammation. And the problem is, hepcidin will actually block ferroportin and cause more inflammation, so it just perpetuates the inflammatory process. And this is why we get fatty liver. It's all a recycling issue. It's all because we don't have enough retinol to load copper into ceruloplasmin, bioavailable copper, to activate those enzymes so we can recycle it into the blood at 24 milligrams. So we can load ferritin in, so we can load iron into ferritin in the cell, right? And when we can't do that, we can't access iron. It creates so much inflammation, it blows into the blood, and now we have more inflammation, and it's perpetuated. And this is how we get fatty liver. Now the question is, how do we fix it, right? It's really about reducing inflammation. It's not just eating retinol-rich foods and you're going to heal. It's eating retinol-rich foods. It's eating, obviously, copper-rich foods like seafoods and shellfish and organ meats and things like that. If you want to learn more about those, download our 10 tips in the description. But it's eating these retinol and copper-rich foods. It's eating whole food C-rich foods, because whole food C contains an enzyme called tyrosinase, which stimulates the liver to produce ceruloplasmin. It's regulating the adrenal-thyroid relationship using our RTM method, because the adrenals and the thyroid, in a stress-free environment physiologically, they actually kind of jumpstart the liver to produce ceruloplasmin. And we need to do that. Why? Because now we can activate hepastin. Now we can activate ferrooxidase. And now we can activate ferroportin. We can recycle iron. We can load iron into ferritin in the cell and keep it out of the blood where it shouldn't be. We can reduce inflammation. Why? Because now we're activating oxygen, and now we're producing energy, and now we're producing antioxidants. It's really that simple, but it takes time. This is a process. It took me 3.5 years to regulate my iron labs and my mineral labs. Was I feeling better along the way? Sure, I was, but I had fatty liver in 2013 because I was saturated in iron, and doctors were like, I don't know what to do, you have fatty liver though. So I took it upon myself to heal myself, and of course, I don't have it anymore. But it wasn't because I was eating too much sugar. It wasn't because I was eating too much fat. It's because I wasn't getting enough retinol, among other reasons too. There was a lot of stress in my life. I was overtraining, and the list goes on. I wasn't eating enough retinol-rich foods, copper-rich foods, etc. So it's about supporting the reticuloendothelial system so you can activate those enzymes, so you can recycle iron and reduce inflammation. Hopefully this makes sense. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in as always. I'm out.